But where there is doubt is developing the inherent native signers linguistic attitude. That is one of the issues I treated when I was talking about language attitude. The problem we will have for this deaf individual who was not assimilated, who was not immersed into sign language, who didn't have early onset of sign language learning, who is now a signer by virtue of being deaf. The challenge we will have is, will they develop that sign language attitude? Will they develop that inherent attitude? It becomes arguable how much of native signers attitude or proficiency that a person can learn, can acquire. But I would say that it's not such a mysterious thing to want to carry out one fully funded research about. If we go back to looking at, the spoken languages, no matter how much a person speaks the language that they did not acquire as a child, they would hardly reach the proficiency of a native speaker. They will hardly reach the competence of a native speaker. Native speakers have unique competence that is not learned but rather acquired. I am not ignorant of the fact that different studies could see acquisition and learning from different perspectives. But as far as our studies are concerned, acquisition happens within a certain stage and learning takes place within a certain stage. And we can say acquisition of language and learning of language, whether signed or spoken. Now, today, what I'm bringing out is, I have met and I have been in contact with a whole lot of deaf persons whose onset to sign language is a delayed one. They came into sign language almost like some hearing persons come into sign language. They came into sign language almost like strangers who don't own the language. And it becomes difficult to develop the inherent cultural native speaker's identity, because it is almost like it is not our thing, even though it becomes something that we need for everyday communication. They can be very proficient signers, beautiful. But when we look at what it takes to own a language and develop it and fight for it and stand for it, it becomes an issue. Now, national sign languages are sign languages of a people that represent their identity. In national sign languages of different communities belong to the different communities, and the individual that use those sign languages, that inherited them, that possibly learned them, they are representatives of those identities. Now, I said this so much in many of my discussions because part of, if not the fundamental reason for the indigenous hands, the indigenous voices approach is to project our indigenous sign languages as inherent cultural identities, as supposed to be for the deaf people who are deaf parented. But where we have some problem is when we look at the deaf community and find out that not many deaf persons are deaf parented. And going beyond just not many deaf people are deaf parented, it goes beyond that to also point to the fact that not many deaf people that we have interacted with have early onset of sign language access. So when we talk about the national sign languages, it seems to be a controversial thing. Now, because this deaf person, like Chinedum, my client, even though they do well in signing, they will always see sign language as something they learn from school. And then possibly a compulsory means of communication. They wouldn't see sign language as something that was dropped on the environment that they were growing up. They will always see sign language as what that our teacher taught us. And eventually, amongst those our teachers, many of them are hearing and not many of them are deaf. You remember, I was dealing with how a child deals with gesture in signing. And I remember I said the study of sign language and sign language linguistics has come to begin to realize the relationship between gesture, speech, and signs. And as surprising as it could sound to the world, linguists are beginning to go back to try to trace where the thin line of demarcation between gestures, speech, and sign. And some are believing that the line is really thinner than we maybe possibly believed. Going back to initial idea when sign languages were being regarded as gestural communications. The difference right now is, at least there is a holistic belief that sign languages are languages like spoken languages, natural languages. Unlike before, when it was believed, oh, they were just communication, they don't have any structure. So we've come to the point where we are looking at sign languages as close to gestures. Now, the fact about gestures and in sign language is that gesture is just kind of those subconscious attitude that will bring in language performance. If I use the word language performance, whether you are speaking or signing it, there are those attitudes we acquired in the course of our acquiring language, and they are not just learned. Even if along the line you continue to pick them up, it's a user of language continues to pick them up. It is because there was ab initio the opening of a door for it to happen through acquisition. So those are those attitudes that accompany every speech and language performance that we make. And like I say, I am a very elaborate gesture user, and they come out subconsciously. Sometimes they look as if they have a grammatical significance with what you want to say. Sometimes they look off. But at the end of the day, when you watch an elaborate gesture user, you find out that no matter whatever happens, whatever they're saying or signing, gesture somehow comes in. So it is an attitude that goes along speech performance or language performance that was developed earlier on when language is being picked up, when language is being acquired. That's what I mean by being picked up, okay? So, I'm bringing the picture of the issue of national sign languages, it is important to the world deaf community that countries should ratify and recognize their national sign languages. I've never seen in any document where the World Federation of the Deaf proposes a country ratifying or recognizing a foreign sign language in their country. Another issue to that, which is problematic to our indigenous communities, judging by where I am standing in my study, is the indigenous deaf languages, which are the indigenous sign languages we have been having contact with, that are being relegated to the background, just like I said, part of which is because they are not being acquired. The deaf persons that are the users of these languages are the ones that are looked at as they are not educated. The ones that are educated are the ones amongst whom had late onset of sign language as a result of the fact that they were either born hearing, became deaf later on, or whether born deaf, no access to sign language until they got to school. Now, the indigenous sign languages, many of which have well-developed structures, are being relegated to the background just because they are being looked at as they are gestures. You see the irony? They are being looked at as they are gestures without any knowledge the significance of gesture to sign language. Now, these indigenous sign languages, because they are not being documented and developed, cannot arise to the standard of national sign languages. And the sign languages that are being taught in school cannot occupy the position of national sign languages, because if they are foreign, they are foreign. If they are English based, if they are signed English, they are signed English, a means of communication that will never be a language. I want us to follow me in the English that we speak. I want us to help me understand. Follow me, understand. I want us to understand this. Understand the predicament of a deaf individual born in an indigenous African deaf community, example of which we have seen in many times. Many of the languages cannot be used that belong to them. The languages that they are taught to use are not theirs, and they see themselves in a situation whereby it becomes difficult to contribute to the language development. Now, I'm going to be talking a lot from this time from this year's theme of International Day of Sign Languages, because there's a whole lot, to really talk about this year's theme, and as it concerns the indigenous deaf communities. So when we look at national sign languages, that each and every one of us believing that we have a responsibility to contribute to the development of national sign languages should consider what a national sign language means to our indigenous deaf communities. Chinedum, my client, is a typical example of a person who will have a late onset of sign language. He may do well signing if eventually his parents, will definitely take him to school. But the problem is, would he acquire, would he develop the language attitude that will work towards the development of the linguistic heritage of where he found himself? This is the indigenous hands, the indigenous voices. where we discuss indigenous sign languages. We are not just trying to paint a picture that doesn't exist. We're not just trying to draw a sympathy. We're not just trying to exaggerate things as they are. We're saying realities. And we're saying that if sign languages will be developed across deaf communities, people who understand the importance of national sign languages should look into some of these issues. That it is not all about, just like I said last week, it is not all about when, how, who taught a deaf child in school or the school they went to. No, but it is all about looking at the issue of onset of sign language acquisition and learning. And look at this with a sense of trying to create some policies that will help to develop indigenous sign languages into national sign languages. If national sign languages are that important for our leaders to identify them and ratify them and recognize them constitutionally, I agree with that premise. But I say the indigenous sign languages should be helped to grow up to the national sign languages, especially in the countries, in the deaf communities where national sign languages are in want. Today, I began a topic that says beyond acquisition. And I'm going to be using this topic to talk about national sign languages, the importance as it's been projected by the WFD as a preparation for the International Day of Sign Languages. And I'm sure you're going to follow me in this journey. And I'm going to be so excited because there's a lot to learn. I encourage you to share our videos with people that have never seen and heard this. I want to give kudos and salute my friend Matt Hall, who is going to be using some of our videos to teach the course he's been teaching. He's going to be teaching this time around. Thank you. And I want to see you next week, right here in the Indigenous Hands, the Indigenous Voices, brought to you by Save the Deaf and Endangered Languages Initiative. Bye.